The envelope had no return address. Plain white, unremarkable, except for the careful penmanship spelling out my name in that same stiff, official HO, a script I'd come to dread. I turned it over in my hands, fingertips catching on the precise hospital corners. The postmark read Richmond, Virginia. I hadn't opened anything from the Sunnyvale HOA board in 11 years. My breath caught. Only one person would send a letter like this. The man who'd once ruled our little slice of suburban hell with an iron gavel and a smile that never reached his eyes. The kitchen clock ticked behind me, each second stretching like one of those endless board meeting minutes where Walter James Moore would lecture about community standards. As I slid my finger under the flap, the paper inside was heavy, formal, black border, embossed letters. In memoriam, Walter James Moore, 1950 to 2024. The room tilted. I gripped the counter, the granite cold against my palm the same way the fines had always felt, cold, calculated, and impossible to ignore. Mom. I looked up to find Micah in the doorway, his lanky 11-year-old frame casting a long shadow across our tiny kitchen. Thoughtful eyes. Quiet strength in the set of his shoulders. The same shoulders that had once fit in the crook of my arm the night I carried him through the pouring rain after Walter slammed the door on my appeal. "Are you going?" he asked. The question hung between us, heavy with all the stories I'd never told him about his grandfather in the HOA sense. The man who'd looked at his bruised, exhausted daughter holding a newborn and chosen covenant rules over mercy. "I don't know, baby." The words came out rough. I cleared my throat. "It's complicated." Micah crossed the kitchen, his sock feet silent on the linoleum. He was wearing the Superman pajamas I'd found on clearance last month, already too short at the ankles. "What happened when I was a baby?" My hand found his hair, darker than mine, but with the same stubborn wave. "You remember me telling you about that?" He leaned against the counter. "You said we needed a fresh start. That's why we stayed right here in Sunnyvale, even when the fine started. Fresh start. Such a gentle way to describe that night." The porch light of Walter's big corner lot casting shadows across his face as he stood in the doorway of his perfect colonial, the rain soaking through my shirt while I begged him, "Just listen," to wave the first violation notice on my eyesore, wildflower garden and Micah's crayon drawings taped in the front window. "You made your bed of dandelions," he'd said. "Now lie in it." The words had followed me through every monthly fine, every anonymous donation I slipped through Mr. Norman to cover Walter's personal HOA dues after his stroke. Not enough for him to track me down, but enough to say I was still part of this community family, even if he didn't want me to be. I'd even driven past his house once when I heard about the stroke, stood at the curb until Brooke spotted me, and had security escort me off the property like I was trespassing on sacred lawn. After that, I'd mailed one of Micah's drawings, a bright crayon scene of a boy and his mother in a garden. No return address, just to let Walter know his grandson had inherited my love of breaking the rules. Now Walter was gone, and with him any chance of hearing the words I'd spent 11 years telling myself I didn't need. The sun was setting outside our kitchen window, painting the walls the same rusted orange as that night on Walter's porch. Micah touched my arm, his fingers warm through my sleeve. "I've never met the HOA president," he said quietly. I looked at my son, this beautiful boy who had never known his father's anger or the president's rejection, who drew pictures of gardens he'd never been allowed to show and still believed community meant something more than covenants and fines. "Some things need to be said," I whispered, "even if they're late." The invitation felt lighter now, as if naming the hurt had somehow eased its weight. Maybe that's what Walter had understood at the end. Maybe that's why he'd made sure I'd know when he was gone. I pulled Micah close, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and the laundry detergent I bought in bulk when it went on sale. Tomorrow we would drive across the neighborhood to say goodbye to the man who had said goodbye to us years ago. But tonight, I held my son in our kitchen as the sunset painted everything gold, and I let myself remember the president I'd had before he became the man who closed every door. The Sunnyvale HOA clubhouse hadn't changed in 35 years. The same red brick exterior, the same white columns where I'd once posed for my welcome to the community photos. Even the cracked third step remained, waiting to trip unwary visitors who dared to question the rules. Micah's hand tightened in mine as we approached. "Mom, just stay close," I whispered. Through the stained glass windows, yes, the HOA had stained glass, because of course they did, I caught glimpses of movement. Dark shapes arranging flowers, straightening programs, preparing to say goodbye to Walter James Moore, the man who had kept this neighborhood perfect for decades. Brooke stood on the top step in a black designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, her perfect posture a weapon. Travis loomed beside her in an equally expensive suit, shoulders squared like a bouncer at an exclusive country club. They positioned themselves as gatekeepers, but they couldn't stop me now. Not anymore. The whispers started before we reached the steps. "Is that Lindsay?" After all these years, the nerve of her showing up now. Mrs. Henderson, my old book club neighbor, physically turned her back as we passed. Mr. Phillips studied his shoes with sudden fascination. But Cousin Rachel's sharp intake of breath cut deep. She had once been my only ally before she chose the covenants over friendship. We slipped into the last row just as the organist began the prelude. The wood felt cool and smooth beneath my fingers, familiar in a way that made my chest ache. How many community meetings had I sat here between Walter and the others, studying the back of Mrs. Miller's elaborate hats, while Walter droned about aesthetic harmony. The usher murmured, "Programs," extending a stack without meeting my eyes. The paper was heavy, expensive. A black and white photo of Walter smiled up at me. The recent one with a stroke-softened face, but the Walter of 15 years ago, strong and stern. Below his dates, the text honored his loving board members, Brooke and Travis Moore. My fingers crumpled the edge before I could stop myself. "Look," Micah whispered, pointing to the photo display in the narthex. Decades of community history arranged on foam board. Holidays, block parties, garden tours. But something was wrong with the images. In the 2013 Labor Day barbecue photo, an awkward gap existed between the board members where I should have been. My welcome potluck picture was conspicuously absent. Even the ancient family-style portrait had been cropped, transforming 4 smiling homeowners into 3. The organ swelled into amazing grace, the hymn Walter had always insisted on for every memorial because it reminded him of his late wife's garden days. I closed my eyes against the sudden burn of tears. A gentle pressure on my shoulder made me start. Aunt Margaret stood in the aisle, her aged hand warm through my jacket. She didn't speak, but her fingers squeezed once before she moved to her seat. Behind her, Mr. Norman caught my eye and nodded, his weathered face kind. The only neighbor who had quietly accepted my anonymous donations for Walter's dues all these years. The service passed in a blur of eulogies about legacy and fatherly devotion to the covenants. Brooke spoke about Walter's dedication to his bored children, both of them. Travis celebrated neighborhood strength. Not once did either of them glance toward our pew. But when Mrs. Pearson, the longtime event coordinator, passed by during the closing prayer, she pressed a folded note into my palm. The paper shook as I opened it. "Your president spoke of you." For words. But they cracked something in my chest that I'd kept carefully sealed for 11 years. The final hymn ended. People began to stir, gathering purses and shuffling toward the exits. I stood, reaching for Micah's hand, but Travis materialized in the aisle. His bulk blocked our path. "Came for the house, huh?" Micah pressed against my side. I lifted my chin. "I came to say goodbye to the president." "Your president?" Travis barked a laugh that echoed off the perfect acoustics. "You gave up that right when you chose your weeds over the rules." No, my voice stayed quiet but carried through the sudden silence. "I gave up safety to protect my son. There's a difference." Brooke's voice rang from the front of the clubhouse. Immediate board members only for the private reading. The crowd parted. Everyone watched, waited. The air felt thick with anticipation and the faint smell of fresh-cut grass from the perfectly manicured lawn outside. I'm still part of this community, I said, each word clear and distinct, whether you acknowledge it or not. Micah's spine straightened beside me. My brave boy. As we turned toward the exit, Mr. Norman touched my elbow. His whisper barely stirred the air. He left something for you. Be at the house at 3. Sunlight spilled through the stained glass, painting the floor in jewel tones. The same light that had once danced across my welcome packet at my first board meeting. Now it blessed my steps as I walked out of the Sunnyvale clubhouse with my head high, my son's hand warm in mine, knowing that somewhere in that room the president had spoken my name. Not even Brooke and Travis could erase that truth. Instead of the graveside service, I went to the hotel with my son. Tomorrow we would gather at the house that used to feel like the center of the neighborhood 11 years ago. The morning sun cast long shadows across the brick walkway as we approached Walter's Colonial. The same white columns of the front porch loomed before us, unchanged since the night I'd stood there in the rain. Mom, Micah whispered. Those people don't look happy to see us. A wall of black-clad figures blocked the entrance. Brooke stood front and center, her pearl necklace catching the light like a tiny crown of entitlement. Travis flanked her right side while Aunt Patricia and Uncle James filled in the gaps. Behind them, cousins and longtime homeowners peered through the windows, their faces pressed against the glass like children at a carnival show. The reading is for legitimate board heirs only. Brooke's voice carried across the lawn, sharp as a freshly sharpened hedge trimmer. You gave up that right 11 years ago. My fingers brushed the attorney's letter in my pocket. The paper felt warm, almost alive against my skin. Mr. Crane specifically requested my presence. Of course he did. Travis took a step forward, his polished shoes squeaking against the porch boards, the same squeak that had always announced his arrival at board meetings to enforce the rules. But this is still private property. A car door slammed behind us. More neighbors arriving to witness the spectacle of the disgraced homeowner's return. Someone whispered, shameless. Another voice murmured, gold digger trying to ruin property values again. The words floated on the April breeze like dandelion seeds, the very weeds I've been fined for. You shouldn't have brought the mistake, Brooke said, her eyes fixed on Micah. The old rage flared, hot and familiar in my chest. But Micah's hand steadied me, his grip reminding me why we'd come. I pulled the letter from my pocket, unfolding it with deliberate care. Actually, I've been legally summoned by Walter James, Moore's personal attorney. The words emerged calm and clear. Travis moved closer, using his height to loom over us. The same trick he'd pulled when we were younger homeowners fighting over parking spots. Listen here, little neighbor, let them in. Aunt Margaret's voice cut through the tension. She appeared from behind the wall of relatives, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. This house was Elizabeth's too. Or have you forgotten your mother's love of a real garden so quickly? The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Brooke's perfectly lined lips pressed into a bloodless smile. Fine, but don't expect any courtesy. I don't expect anything, I said, guiding Mike up the steps and keeping myself between him and Travis. Just the courtesy of following the president's final wishes. The foyer smelled of lemon polish and lilies, the same scent that had always greeted me at board meetings. The grandfather clock still marked each second with the same hollow tick that had counted down every fine notice. Community portraits lined the walls, carefully edited versions that showed no trace of the single mom who once dared to plant wildflowers. Attorney Crane waited in the study, his briefcase open on Walter's mahogany desk. The smug confidence on Brooke and Travis's faces as they settled into the leather armchairs made my stomach clench. They'd had 11 years to whisper in Walter's ear about his ungrateful homeowner. Now then, Crane's voice carried the weight of decades of HOA law. Before we proceed with the reading, there's something Walter wanted you all to see. He lifted a small video player from his briefcase. Brooke's smile faltered. Travis sat forward, his fingers drumming against the chair arm like he was already drafting a new violation notice. The screen flickered to life. Walter's face filled the frame, older than I remembered. Deep lines carved valleys around his mouth. His hair had gone completely white. "If you're watching this," he began, his voice raspier than the one of my memories. I finally ran out of chances to say these things in person. He cleared his throat. "Lindsay, if you're here, it means you're braver than I ever was." The air left my lungs. Micah pressed closer to my side. "You left because you had to live. And I didn't open the door when you needed me most." Walter's eyes seemed to look straight through the screen. "But you kept sending money through Norman. You stayed part of this community even when I stopped treating you like one." Travis made a small, strangled sound. I kept Micah's drawing above my desk. The camera panned to show a framed crayon picture, bright flowers and stick figures beneath a yellow sun. I looked at it every day. My neighbor's boy has his mother's gift for finding beauty in simple things. My vision blurred. I blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. Which brings me to the matter of inheritance. Walter's face returned to the screen. "To my neighbor Lindsay, I leave the Sunnyvale corner home valued at $430,000 and my savings account containing $145,000. "What?" Travis surged to his feet, knocking his chair backward. "Additionally, I've established a college fund for my neighbor's son, Micah, in the amount of $90,000. Brooke's face contorted. "This can't be legal." To my other board members, Brooke and Travis, Walter continued, his voice steady, "I leave $15,000 each, along with their choice of personal mementos for my study." He wasn't in his right mind. Travis's fist slammed against the desk. "We took care of him. We were here." Attorney Crane reached into his briefcase again. "I have here a complete psychological evaluation performed 3 months ago, certifying Walter's mental competence." "But the money she sent," Brooke's voice shook. "It was guilt money. Trying to buy her way back in." "Mr." Norman stepped forward from his corner. A manila envelope appeared in his hands. "I have 11 years of payment receipts. Every month, like clockwork, your neighbor made sure the president's personal dues and medical costs were covered. She never missed a payment, even when times were tight." The room spun slightly. I steadied myself against the bookshelf, my fingers brushing the familiar spines. A flash of color caught my eye. There, above Walter's desk, hung Micah's drawing, carefully matted, professionally framed, position where someone seated at the desk would see it with every glance up. My fingers traced the glass over Micah's childish signature. The first tear fell, leaving a dark spot on my sleeve. "Mom," Micah's voice came soft beside me. "Are you okay?" The question echoed across 11 years of silence, across rain-soaked nights and carefully addressed envelopes with no return address, across all the words the president and I had never found the courage to say. "Yes, baby." I touched the frame one more time, feeling the shape of forgiveness beneath my fingers. "I think I finally am." 3 days later, after I returned home and my siblings' constant pestering from the porch of Walter's house, now mine, I watched Brooke and Travis huddled with their attorney on the front steps. Their voices carried across the yard in angry whispers punctuated by sharp gestures toward the house I now owned. The morning sun caught Travis's wedding ring as he stabbed his finger at a document. "Your president wasn't in his right mind. We can prove it." A familiar tightness gripped my chest. 11 years ago, I had stood on these same steps, my arms aching from holding newborn Micah while Walter closed the door on my garden appeal. Now my son slept upstairs in what used to be the guest room, his sketchbook open on the nightstand. The screen door creaked behind me. "Mr." Norman stepped out, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the light. "You should know what they're saying in the neighborhood. Tell me." Travis called the Richmond Herald this morning. Claimed you abandoned the president during his illness. Called you a gold digger coming back for the inheritance. I pressed my palm against the porch railing, feeling the warm wood beneath my fingers. The same railing where Elizabeth used to hang Christmas lights, where she taught me to deadhead her prized roses before the covenants banned anything that wasn't approved greenery. "That's not the worst of it, mister," Norman continued. "Brooke's been changing the locks while you visit the cemetery. And the whispers at the clubhouse." He shook his head. "What whispers?" "That you never cared about Walter." that you only sent money to ease your conscience. A cardinal landed on Elizabeth's old bird feeder, brilliant red against the weatherwood. I had spent 11 years carrying the weight of that night in the rain, the sound of Walter's door closing. 11 years of quiet support through Mr. Norman, hoping someday the president would understand why I had to plant my garden anyway. We need to talk to the doctor about his state of mind, I said. Mr. Norman nodded. Already made the appointment, and I've got every receipt from your monthly payments. 11 years of dues and medical bills. Never missed one. The attorney's voice rose again. We'll file first thing Monday. I turned from the porch, heading inside to the study where Walter's presence still lingered. The leather chair where he read his evening violation notices. The desk calendar marked with his careful handwriting. And there, above the desk, Micah's crayon drawing in its simple frame. Opening the bottom drawer, I found Walter's journal, its pages filled with his strong, slanting script. I saw Lindsay today at the hospital. She thought I was sleeping. My neighbor looked tired, but her shoulders were straight, just like Elizabeth's. The entry stopped there, a water stain blurring the final words. A knock at the front door pulled me from the journal. Aunt Margaret stood on the threshold, clutching her pocketbook. Those vipers are still out there plotting, she said, stepping inside. But I've got something they don't know about. She settled into Elizabeth's old armchair, smoothing her skirt. Walter talked about you, Lindsay, every Sunday after board meetings over coffee and pecan pie. He kept a photo of you in his wallet from your first community potluck. Said you were the only one who inherited Elizabeth's strength. My throat tightened. He never told me. Men of his generation, she shook her head. They think silence is the same as strength. But he was proud of you, especially after Mrs. Pearson told him about your work at the library and how you still paid your dues even when the fines piled up. Mrs. Pearson, why do you think he requested Amazing Grace for his service? It was Elizabeth's favorite hymn, the one she sang while gardening before the Covenant's band Anything Wild. Outside, car doors slammed, voices rose. I moved to the window in time to see Travis stumbling toward his Mercedes, tie loosened, face flushed. He was shouting at a man with a notebook, a reporter from the looks of it. She bewitched him somehow. Travis's words carried across the lawn. Our president would never. Brooke rushed after him, her carefully applied makeup cracking as she screamed at the reporter to leave. Their attorney stood apart, briefcase clutched to his chest, watching his clients unravel in the morning sun. The truth has a way of rising, Aunt Margaret said softly. Like cream in coffee. I returned to Walter's desk, running my fingers along its smooth surface. Something caught beneath the bottom edge, an envelope taped underneath. My name written in Walter's shaky hand. What will you do with it? Aunt Margaret asked. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, weighted with words the president couldn't speak in life. Through the window, I watched my siblings retreat to their cars, leaving their attorney alone on the sidewalk. He stared up at the house for a long moment before pulling out his phone. Some truths, I told her, need to be said, even if they're late. A floorboard creaked overhead. Micah, stirring from his nap. Soon he'd come downstairs asking about lunch, maybe wanted to show me a new drawing. My son, who had never known the taste of rejection, who filled blank pages with gardens he'd never been allowed to show. I slipped the envelope into my pocket, saving it for when I was ready. Some wounds need time to heal before you can look at them in full daylight. But for now, the weight of it against my hip felt like a beginning. Aunt Margaret rose, touching my shoulder as she passed. Elizabeth would be proud of how you've handled this. Both of them would be. The morning sun streamed through the study windows, warming the leather of Walter's chair. Outside, the cardinal still perched on the feeder, singing its bright song into the Virginia air. I thought of all the mornings Elizabeth spent filling that feeder, telling me how birds remember kindness, how they always return home, no matter how many violation notices try to scare them away. The next day, Brooke and Travis arrived at sunset, carrying between them a weathered cardboard box filled with photo albums. The leather bindings cracked when they opened them on the kitchen table, releasing the musty scent of forgotten memories. "Look," Brooke said, her voice wavering. She pointed to a Polaroid of 3 children on a tire swing. "Remember this? The old oak tree behind the clubhouse." I kept my hands in my lap, watching her manicured fingernail trace the edge of the photo. The memory surfaced unbidden, Travis pushing too hard, the rope snapping, Elizabeth rushing over with Band-Aids and kisses before the Covenants banned unsafe play structures. Walter would have wanted us to be community again. Brooke's eyes glistened. She'd practiced this performance, I realized. The slight catch in her voice, the precise moment to dab at her tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. Travis leaned forward, his suit jacket stretching across broad shoulders. "We've been thinking. What Walter really meant was for us to share everything equally. The house, the account, split 3 ways like when we were kids fighting over parking spots. The silence stretched between us like taffy, sweet and artificial. Through the window, I watched Micah sketching in his notebook under the maple tree where Elizabeth used to hang laundry before the rules banned outdoor lines. "I found something," I said, reaching into my cardigan pocket. The envelope was soft from hours of handling. Walter's handwriting a spidery scrawl across the front. Brooke's spine stiffened. "What is that?" I broke the seal and unfolded the pages, the paper whispering against my fingers. The words blurred, then sharpened. "I watch you from afar through Norman's eyes," I read aloud. The kitchen clock ticked, marking each revelation. Every month when your money arrived, I couldn't bear my own cowardice. Travis's knuckles whitened around his coffee mug. "The day I learned you came during my stroke, I cried myself to sleep." The last words trembled in the air between us. A car door slammed outside. Thunder rumbled in the distance. If Elizabeth hadn't left, maybe he wouldn't have died alone. Brooke's words cracked across the kitchen like lightning. Micah appeared in the doorway, his sketchbook clutched against his chest. His eyes darted between us before he bolted, screen door banging behind him. Rain started falling as I ran after him, fat drops marking the path to the old metal awning where I used to hide with my books before the HOA banned unsightly storage. Micah huddled underneath, his shoulders shaking. I crawled beside him, water soaking through my jeans. The awning thrummed with rain, the same hollow music it had made 25 years ago. Your president made mistakes. I pulled him close, breathing in the pencil shavings and apple shampoo scent of him, but I still loved the community he tried to build. I've never once regretted planting my garden anyway. The storm passed quickly, leaving puddles that reflected the breaking clouds. When we returned to the kitchen, Aunt Margaret stood at the stove, stirring hot chocolate. The familiar scent of Hershey's cocoa and vanilla wrapped around us like a blanket. "Mr." Norman appeared with Walter's old Afghan, the one Elizabeth had crocheted during her last winter before the rules banned non-approved textiles. He draped it over Micah's shoulders with the gentle hands that had passed my monthly payments to Walter for 11 years. The doorbell chimed. "Mrs." Pearson bustled in with a covered casserole dish, steam escaping when she lifted the lid. "Just like I used to make for Elizabeth," she said, her voice warm with remembrance. How she loved my chicken and dumplings. Travis slumped at the table, the fight draining from him like water. "He always liked you best." His words dissolved into bitter tears. "Even after everything. We thought he'd change the will if we kept you away." Brooke's admission fell into the quiet kitchen. Her mascara left black tracks down her cheeks. I stirred my hot chocolate, watching the marshmallows melt into white swirls. The old kitchen walls held the echo of so many words spoken and unspoken, harsh and tender, lost and found. I never wanted his money. Steam rose from my cup like incense. I just wanted him to see me. Outside, a cardinal landed on the windowsill. A bright splash of red against the rain-washed glass. Elizabeth used to say they were messengers from heaven. I watched it hop once, twice, then take flight into the clearing sky. Micah's pencil scratched against paper, capturing the moment in gentle graphite strokes. The Afghan slipped from one shoulder and missed her. Norman quietly adjusted it. Mrs. Pearson hummed as she served up bowls of dumplings, the tune something old and sweet from childhood summers before the Covenants turned everything beige. Aunt Margaret touched my hand, her fingers liver-spotted and warm. In the corner, Brooke and Travis sat apart. Their careful facades crumbled to dust, leaving only the scared board members they'd always been. The Cardinals' echo of red lingered in my vision like an afterimage of hope. Sometimes I thought forgiveness isn't a single moment, but 1,000 small mercies. A bowl of chicken and dumplings, a borrowed blanket, the shelter of an old awning in the rain. Would you like more hot chocolate? Aunt Margaret asked Micah. He nodded, and she poured with the same steady hands that had taught me to hold a teacup when I was small. The marshmallows bobbed and spun like white stars in a chocolate sky. The next couple of days would bring more storms, more words, more wounds to heal. But tonight, in this kitchen full of broken homeowners trying their best to be whole, I felt the first fragile threads of peace begin to weave themselves together. Outside, the last rays of sunset painted the puddles gold. 3 days later, the key turned in the lock with a solid thunk. Behind me, Micah bounced on his toes, clutching his art supplies to his chest. We stood in the foyer of what was now our home, the thought still caught in my throat like a fishing hook. Can I set up in the sunroom? The light looks perfect for painting. I nodded, watching him dart down the hallway. His footsteps stirred dust motes that danced in shafts of morning sun. The house had been closed up since the funeral, but beneath the mustiness I caught hints of furniture polish and Walter's pipe tobacco, the same scent that used to fill the air at every board meeting. The windows protested as I pushed them open one by one. Fresh spring air rushed in, carrying the scent of awakening earth from Elizabeth's garden. I paused at the kitchen window, remembering how she'd stand here washing dishes, humming hymns while watching Cardinals at the feeder before the Covenants band non-standard landscaping. In the shed, her gardening gloves still hung on their hook, faded green canvas. The fingers curled as if waiting for her hands. I slipped them on. They fit perfectly. The flower beds had gone wild in the years since her death. Weeds tangled with heritage roses, choking out the delicate blooms she tended so carefully. But underneath winter's debris, green shoots pushed toward the sun. The bulbs she'd planted decades ago still remembered their purpose, no matter how many violation notices tried to kill them. Mom! Micah's voice floated from the sunroom. Come look. He had set up his easel in the corner where Elizabeth's once stood. His pencils lined the windowsill in rainbow order, just as she'd arranged her pastels. I hadn't told him about that habit of hers. I'm drawing the bird out there. He pointed to a sparrow hopping between puddles. Do you think Grandma Elizabeth would have liked my art? She would have loved it. My voice caught. She always said art was how we capture light, even when the HOA tries to dim it. That afternoon, I tackled my old bedroom, the pale yellow walls I'd chosen at 16 still there. My fingers traced the pencil marks behind the door where I'd tracked my height until college. The lowest mark bore Elizabeth's handwriting, Lindsay, age 5. The mattress complained as I sank onto it. Springs singing an old familiar song. Outside my window, the massive oak tree filtered sunlight through new leaves. How many nights had I lain here watching those shadows dance across my ceiling before Walter's rules band, visible personal expression? Mister. Norman arrived at dusk, carrying a cardboard box tied with twine. Found these in Walter's study, he said, setting it on the kitchen counter. Think you should have them. Inside I found newspaper clippings, my promotion at the library, a write-up about our summer reading program, birthday cards Walter had written but never sent, their envelopes sealed and stamped. At the bottom, a letter in his shaky hand. From that day on, I stopped calling you a disgrace and started calling you my neighbor again. Every month when your money came, I knew I'd failed you, not the other way around. The doorbell rang before I could read more. Aunt Margaret stood on the porch with a casserole dish. Behind her, Mrs. Pearson waved from her car. Hope you don't mind, Aunt Margaret said. But it's Sunday, family dinner tradition, even if the board tried to cancel it. Micah set the table with the old china while I heated Margaret's chicken and dumplings. The kitchen filled with the sounds I remembered from childhood. Forks clinking, ice cubes settling in glasses, comfortable conversation flowing like honey. "Show them your new drawing, honey," I called to Micah. He proudly displayed his sketch, a sparrow sheltering under a rose leaf during a summer shower. Mrs. Pearson clasped her hands. "Mr." Norman nodded approvingly. "You've got your grandmother's eye," Aunt Margaret said. She could always find beauty in simple moments, even when the Covenants called it ugly. Later, after our guests left, I stood in the garden as evening settled over Richmond. Elizabeth's roses had survived, scattered but stubborn. With time and care, they'd thrive again. Through the windows behind me, lamplight spilled onto the lawn. The house felt different now. Warm, welcoming, alive with possibility. "Mom," Micah called from the back door. "Can you help me with this math problem?" I smiled, breathing in the night air. The garden would wait. Right now my son needed me. And for the first time since returning to Walter's house, that simple truth felt like enough. Walking toward the house, I whispered words I'd held inside for 11 years. He finally saw me. The porch light clicked on automatically, Walter's doing, his final gift of illumination. In its glow, Micah bent over his homework at the kitchen table, right where I used to sit. The sight filled my chest with an ache so sweet it could barely be called pain. We were home. Not the home of my old violations, but something new, something ours. And somewhere in the neighborhood, the cardinals sang on, reminding everyone that even the strictest covenants can't silence a garden that refuses to stay quiet.